Today we're going to be talking about a few things that might help us to serve God better as we go through our days. And we're going to be continuing our look at the book of Acts and continuing to look at the work that Paul did on his missionary journeys. Last week we saw how Paul entered the city of Athens, and when he entered the city, he saw all the idols that they worshipped in that city. And because of that, he was able to go to them, and he says that he saw that they are a very religious people. You know, they had all these idols trying to fill a void. And so he realized they were looking for something. And so he shares the gospel message with the people of Athens. And we're told many come to faith, while many others were intrigued at what was taught. And so there was an impact that he made in the city of Athens. Then he turns his attention to the people of Corinth. In Acts chapter 18, we find some actions that he does that could possibly help us in our own ministry efforts. You know, for each one of us that are followers of Jesus Christ, we are all in ministry in some way. You know, we all minister to our families and our friends and to our co-workers. And so we need to know, how can we serve him better? How can we be better prepared to serve God as we go through our days? Well, one of the first things we can do is, number one, find others to share the load. Here's Acts 18, verse 1. After this, after Paul was in Athens, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath, he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade the Jews and Greeks. And so Paul, he goes to this new city, goes to Corinth, and he meets a Jew named Aquila and his wife Priscilla. And so he found these fellow Jews, and they weren't just Jews that he found, they were tent makers like he was. And so he was able to join them in their tent making business, which brought him support to his ministry that he did on the Sabbaths. And so he found these two people that he had that common interest in tent making, but a common interest in faith, and they were able to work together. And so he found these individuals that could share the load of support, but also help with ministry along the way. You know, for me, I've always been interested in the tent making ministry, where you have something that you do that supports the work of ministry without being a burden upon other people, yet having the freedom to serve when and wherever needed. And back in my college days, I worked at Pizza Hut. And this franchise, they had a corporate chaplain. And I thought, man, that is like the best of both worlds. Here's this guy who can spend time at these restaurants, getting to know staff and customers, being paid by the corporation, and yet able to jump in and help wherever needed. You know, I didn't see that happen in this case, but in my back of my mind, I always thought, that's perfect. You have somebody supporting you to be in where the people are, and you can be involved. And for me, where I'm at today, you know, the church supports me. You know, they are the predominant supporters of my ministry. But I've also been connected to the YMCA. And it's the same scenario, but with the church as my main support. You know, I'm able to get to know staff and members, and I'm able to jump in and help where needed. Although I did find out that you can't just jump into and help somebody that somebody else gets paid to do. Anyway, whatever that is. But I'm able to be at the Y to connect with people in our community while still having time to prepare messages and studies, and also available to witness and counsel those in need. But I have a group that that supports the work that I do. And so for us, it is important for us to look for someone or a group or to support one another in our faith. Whether that's a small group or a Sunday school class at church or a men's group, a women's group, a co-ed group, maybe it's with coworkers that are believers, and you join together so that you realize, or you can help each other in the ministry that God gives us to do. In Paul's case, it was Aquila and Priscilla. For us, it might be our next door neighbor. It might be the person in the cubicle next to us. But to find those groups, because having a group to count on can strengthen our faith and our witness. We can go through our life and we can seek advice from those that we have that connection with. We have a group that will pray for each other and pray for those individuals that we're trying to reach or we're trying to witness to. We have a group that can work together to address whatever issues that arise. And that's what Paul faced. He walked in, he met this couple, and they had the same background in tent making. And so he was able to use them to support the work that he did in ministry. Another thing we can do is, number 2, know when to move on. Verse 5, when Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, so Paul had left Athens, went to Corinth, leaving instructions that Silas and Timothy were to come to him as soon as it was possible. Well, they arrive from Macedonia, and at that point, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." And so when Silas and Timothy arrive in Corinth, Paul devotes his time to teaching, to testifying, to proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. But at this point, he went specifically to the Jewish people, the people that were waiting for a Messiah. And he proclaimed that Jesus was the Messiah. But most of those Jews, they could not accept that teaching. And many Jews today, they still cannot accept the teaching that this Jesus is the one who is the Messiah, the Son of God. And so they opposed Paul and they became abusive and they didn't want to listen to anything that he was saying. And as a result, Paul moves on. He moves on from them. And it tells us he shook out his clothes in protest. Or in other ways, they say it in the scripture, they kicked the dust off their feet. Or we washed our hands of it and we were just walking away. I'm done with you. You're on your own. Your blood be on your own heads. Paul was saying, I did my part. Now it's up to them to do whatever they want with the message. And he moved on. He moved on to the Gentiles. Because the gospel was always presented first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. And so Paul followed this plan and was released from the Jews to go to the Gentiles, through which we have received the message. And the same is true for those in our lives that we have been ministering to. We care for their needs. We share the gospel through word and deed. We pray for their salvation. We listen to their stories. We give them opportunities to respond. But there may come a day when we have to move on from them. We continue to pray for them, but we turn them over to God. They've heard the message. They've heard the truth. They know what they're supposed to do. But we may have to just step aside and move on, trusting God that He will make the needed changes and will open their eyes to the truth. And so we have to think about, who are those people that we have been ministering to that have the same issues and the same battles day after day, month after month, year after year, that just might need this loving act of walking away and giving them over to God. That's a tough move, but we have to serve God better. We have to know, or we have to come in tune with Him to know when it's time to walk away and allow God to do the work in them. And as we walk away, number 3, to go to those who are receptive. Verse 7. Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. So Paul, he was teaching this message to the Jews, and they became obstinate, and they attack him, and so he shakes the dust off his coat, kicks the dust off his feet, washes their hands of them, says, "I'm done. I'm moving away from you Jews. I'm going to the Gentiles." He moved on to those who were receptive to the message, but he didn't have to go very far. It literally said, right next door to the Jewish synagogue, he went to this Gentile who was a worshiper of God named Titius Justus. Right next door. And also one of the synagogue leaders who had heard Paul speaking and accepted his message was also in this home, named Crispus. They were eager to hear the message that Paul had to teach. And it tells us that many of the Corinthians heard the message and they believed. And it was simply going to those who were receptive, leaving those or moving on from those that are not progressing, and moving on to those who are responsive to the message. And to go to those who are receptive to the message of Jesus may be closer than we realize. It could be our next door neighbor that we haven't even started a conversation with because we're busy with other people and things. Or maybe it's someone in that group that we go out and meet for breakfast once, twice, 3, 5 times a week. Or perhaps it's a coworker or a former coworker with whom that we have a connection with, and they may be interested in talking about spiritual things and the message of Christ. Or it could be that person we see every time we go to those places that we frequent. The person at the bank or the grocery store or the fitness facility, the gas station, the restaurants that we visit. And you develop a relationship, a rapport with those individuals, and they might be the ones that are receptive to the message. And so we have to have our eyes open, our ears open, to realize who those individuals are and to trust that God will open the doors for those situations. But in number 4, in all things, whatever we do, we are to trust in the Lord. Verse 9, one night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city. So Paul stayed in Corinth for 1.5 years, teaching them the word of God. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack on Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, if you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names and your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. So he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul, and Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. So for Paul, we see that God promised to protect him. He has this dream, and God tells him, don't be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one is going to attack you and harm you, because I have many people in this city. And that is true no matter where we are. God has people, many people in every city in this world. And so he's tells Paul, don't be afraid to speak. I'm there for you. I'm going to protect you. No one's going to attack you or harm you. Keep on speaking the message. And in the same way, God will protect us as we serve him within reason. You know, I've read a story years ago about a missionary who believed that, and, you know, in his mind, in his heart and mind, he believed that he was basically invincible until God called him home. So it didn't matter what situations he went into to share the gospel, God was going to protect him until it was time for him to come home. So he was not afraid to go into dangerous situations. And his family understood his belief and trusted that God was going to protect him. But I believe the story ends with, you know, he did die at the hands of those he was trying to reach. But he wasn't afraid because he knew God would protect him as he shared the message of God. And in the same way, we too can be invincible to a degree. You know, God knows the number of our days. And he's going to bring us home when it is our time to go. You know, there's nothing, we cannot change when he's going to bring us home. But that doesn't mean we can do whatever we want. You know, we need to be careful not to just flippantly go into places where there's the potential of injury or death. But to be mindful of where we go, but also trusting that God's going to protect us as we share the message of Christ with others. And for Paul, God brought protection from an unlikely source. Here he was, Paul was falsely accused by the Jews. And so they took Paul before the leader of Achaia named Gallio, and they made their accusation against him. And he tells us that Paul was just getting ready to open his mouth to defend himself when he was interrupted by Gallio, the leader of Achaia. And Gallio basically came to Paul's defense. He says the accusations against him were not criminal. It was not a criminal matter. It had to do with religion. And so Gallio did not place judgment upon Paul and sent the Jews on their way. You know, in response, the Jews, and this is funny, I mean, humorous to me, in response, the Jews were angry, so they beat up another synagogue ruler named Sosthenes, but Gallio paid no attention to them. You know, the things that the Jews were expecting to happen came to a quick end because of God's intervention through Gallio. And the same is true for us. As we go about doing God's work, he will protect us. But it might come from an unexpected way. It might be an internal thought that we have, that sense that we have, that something's not right, and so we move a different direction. Or it might be an unexpected delay in our day. How many times have you heard people say, there was a bad accident, and if I would have left when I was planning to, I would have been right there at that time. Or if I wasn't slowed down by the train that was stopped on the tracks, I would have been involved in that accident 2 miles down the road. And so if there's a delay in our day, you know, maybe look to that thought of God is protecting us, and we trusting him that there's a reason for this delay. Or even the wisdom of a child. That you can be talking about something and this little child will say something that is beyond their years. And God is protecting us and using that child to reveal truth. Or even when an enemy comes to our aid, someone that we've had disagreements with, someone that maybe we do not like, have never liked, and we're put in a position, and they come to our aid. God can do those kinds of things, and we just have to trust in the Lord no matter what it is we do. That He is the one that's in control, and He's going to do what needs to be done. And if we want to serve Him better, we will just trust in Him. So as we serve Him, as we live out our days for Him, let's work together to support one another, to build each other up, to encourage one another, to have that base upon which we can serve the Lord. Be willing to let go of those individuals and those situations that you just you do not have a breakthrough, and just leave it to the Lord and trust that He's going to work in those situations. But at the same time, keep our eyes open to see who are those that show interest in spiritual matters, and begin those conversations with them as God opens up those doors. But above all, count on God. He's going to help us through each and every situation. There may be times where He seems to be absent, where He seems to be far away, but He is always close by. And we need to trust in Him. So let's go out there. Let's serve the Lord. May we do the best we can at being His servants in this world in which we live. God bless. Have a great day. And I'll see you next time.